all want to know how we stack up financially against others. Am I earning less than I should? Am I earning more than my friends? Am I about to have an existential crisis if I watch this video and find out the net worth of the average German or American compared to me? Well, let's find out how we keep up with the Jochems. Huh? Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. I am Donnie, and along with my wife Aubrey, we are two Americans currently living in Germany with our family, sharing all of our experiences living and traveling throughout Europe. Honestly, comparing ourselves to others is a great way of leading ourselves down a dark path of dissatisfaction. Let's be honest, none of us are about to buy our ticket to become an astronaut. I'm no financial wizard, just an American immigrant living in Germany, and this whole topic of how do I stack up is actually on my mind because I'm in the process of applying for German citizenship, and a big focus of this process is the German government wanting us to prove our financial situation is solid and that if they grant us citizenship, we wouldn't become a burden on German society. However, because talking about money we earn or have is such a taboo topic in both Germany and the US, and because over the last 6 years, I have definitely observed that Germans and Americans treat money habits completely differently, I'm left wondering, how will the German government perceive our income or net worth? Am I doing well according to German standards, or am I falling behind? Well, okay, and we all want to know if Americans or Germans are richer, so we'll figure that out too, because that's exactly what I'm going to talk about today in my video. Jochems or Joneses? We'll see who owns the mostesses. One thing Germans love is a nice, thick, bulging wallet.
And a wallet for your money.
Look at this thing. It's huge.
No, why would you want sleek, efficient, chiropractor-approved cards when you could have...
My back is killing me.
Well, in Germany, cash is still very much king, and where we hadn't really had a need to touch actual cash in the US for years before moving to Germany, now I feel like I'm going outside undressed if I don't have cash in my pocket. To be fair, COVID really pushed Germany forward into starting to move away from cash payments, yet in 2023, 51% of transactions were still done in cash, compared to just 16% in the US. In fact, there are still a large number of stores, bakeries, and restaurants in our neck of the woods that are cash only, and the surprise at the till leaves patrons running out to the ATM machines conveniently parked outside the business doors. But one very important and interesting difference we found in Germany isn't just the heavy use of cash, but the utter rejection of specifically credit cards in Germany. Of transactions using cards in Germany, 83% were done with a debit card and only 2% were done using credit cards. For those that may not understand the difference, a debit card is essentially using your cash via a card as it is directly debited from your account immediately at purchase, whereas a credit card is a line of credit which allows you to borrow money from whoever issued the card to buy something and then you repay them later. This was honestly one of my first big culture shocks when we moved here, because that is all in stark contrast to the US, where the average American holds 3.9 credit cards. I don't know what they do with that 0.1 of a card that's missing. And 31% of all payment transactions are by credit cards. In the US, playing the credit card game is huge as people try and rack up points on purchases. Americans will even open up credit cards just before a trip to Europe for the sign-on bonuses to try and cover the flights. Something I have never heard of Germans doing in preparation for a trip. Now, that's not to say that Germany doesn't have this sort of system. For example, Germany's flagship airline Lufthansa has their point collecting card, the Miles and More card. But Germans and Americans simply have different ways of viewing literally how to spend money that comes from a few different cultural norms that I have observed. First, there are taxes. The tax rates in Germany were definitely a shock for us, and we do pay higher taxes here than if we were in the US. The average tax wedge for the one earner married couple with 2 children is 33.3% in Germany, whereas in the US it is only 20.1%. With German taxes being so high, cash is often a preferred payment method because 1, a business can save on paying the transaction fees associated with card transactions, but also 2, they don't necessarily need to report every single transaction to the government, so they don't have to pay the high VAT on it. Obviously, this is very much illegal, and in fact, the newest coalition government recently announced they want to push Germany into requiring businesses to start offering at least one form of non-cash payments and push Germany into finally joining the rest of Western Europe in the 21st century, 25 years after it started. And part of that is to crack down on tax fraud. Therefore, at least currently, simply because of the current tax system and rates, Germans have a bit of a motivator to lean towards cash payments so they can pocket more money tax-free. In the US, obviously this isn't unheard of, but where in Germany, cash is king, and the US, customer is king. It does seem like businesses tend to lean more towards making shopping more convenient for the customer than necessarily skipping out on taxes. With how ingrained cashless payments are in the US, businesses may not be in business long if they don't offer cashless options. In my experience, this practice is more common for people doing small side hustles, babysitters, or kids operating illegal rings of black market lemonade stands or lawn mowing services. As a business owner in Germany myself, I do have the pleasure of being familiar with the German tax system and the struggle for businesses here. However, I would like to shed a little light as well on the blight that Americans living abroad have to deal with, and that's that not only do we deal with the German bureaucracy and high taxes, but also American taxes, because the US is extremely unique in that it is one of 2 nations in the world that taxes its citizens based on, well, being a citizen rather than residency. There are agreements between nations around the world to try and avoid double taxation, so in many cases, an American living abroad isn't actually double taxed. However, you do still have to file taxes in both countries just for Uncle Sam to make sure you might not actually owe something, because there are indeed exceptions to the no double taxation rules where they might double tax you. Thankfully for Americans abroad, there is Prince.tax to make everything easier. I can speak from experience that it is hard to find an accountant who is willing to take on 2 countries' tax laws. Prince.tax is a one-stop shop because of their unique specialized expertise in international tax law, and because they can help you with filing both in Germany and the US, eliminating the need to have separate German and American accountants. And look, even with being a native English speaker, I still get confused by tax laws in the US. So don't even get me started on trying to figure out German Finanzamt bureaucracy in German. Prince.tax also does everything in English and directly communicates to the Finanzamt, so you never have to worry about doing that yourself. No matter where you're currently located, if you need income confirmation for immigrating to Germany, already been here for a while, or even already have left the country and have some loose ends to tie up here in Germany, Prince.tax has you covered. Get a free introductory call by filling out their contact form using the link in the description of this video, and start simplifying your life today. The second reason Germans have a tendency to reject credit card culture is debt. Are Americans drowning in debt while Germans are blissfully living debt-free? In Germany, there is a saying, Bares für Rares. Nur Bares für Rares. Nur Bares ist Wahres. If Germans can't pay cash for it, they often don't buy it rather than taking out loans or using credit cards. Generally speaking, Germany has a culture of rejecting debt in almost any form, but that doesn't mean they are completely debt-free. In Germany, the average debt per household is 31,565 euro compared to the average household debt being nearly 3 times higher in the credit card obsessed US. But not only is the reluctance or acceptance for debt different, but also what Germans and Americans go in debt for are very different. Nearly 70% of US consumer debt is mortgages, but beautifully, only 0.7% are seriously delinquent, meaning a monthly payment is late by 90 days. In fact, the home ownership rate in the US is at about 66%, and 38.5% of Americans who own a home don't have a mortgage at all. However, in Germany, many Germans may not have as much debt as Americans, but, and it is a big but, a majority of Germans don't own a home. In fact, Germany has one of the lowest home ownership rates amongst the OECD countries. Now, the reason for this isn't purely a culture of hating debt, but there are many reasons for this, with some stemming back to post-war rebuilding, strict renter protection laws, high fees and taxes associated with buying a home in Germany, or mortgage interest not being tax deductible here. As we'll see later, this does have a big impact on the comparison of net worth between Americans and Germans, as Germans don't really own any real estate. In the US, you will also often hear the term
good debt.
Good debt. Good flavor of debt.
Simply put, good debt makes you rich.
This isn't exclusively an American thing.
Aber gute Schulden, denn Schulden sind grundsätzlich nichts Schlechtes, davon kann man nie genug haben. Also ich habe gern viele und gute Schulden.
But it is a term you'll hear a bit less frequently in Germany. But one good debt, or a debt that is supposed to be worth taking in order to receive a greater return on an investment in the future, is the biggest chunk of US debt that isn't related to housing: student loan debt. This is a debt that Germans don't even think about taking, as 90% of students in Germany go to public universities that are essentially free, besides a few €100 for materials or semester fees, thus making this less of a good debt in the US and more of a probably unnecessary debt if you just went to school in Germany instead. Now, the question must be asked: why are Germans so much more opposed to taking on debt than Americans, even if they might be considered good debt? Well, one big reason among many reasons is because Germans are very risk adverse, whereas Americans are generally more risk tolerant. This is seen in other ways Germans and Americans handle their finances. In the US, one of the things that immediately comes to mind for many Americans when they think, how can I get more wealth and live comfortably? Stocks. More than 60% of Americans have money in the stock market. However, of those with incomes of $100,000 a year or more, 87% have money invested in the stock market. Americans even have shown to have a fairly high risk tolerance when it comes to investments, with 78% of those who have money invested saying they have a moderate to high level of risk tolerance. Are stocks a get-rich-quick scheme? Maybe, if you had a crystal ball and knew to buy GameStop stocks in January of 2021, or to sell stocks before Trump's tariff crusades began. But many Germans see it as a massive gamble and risk they aren't willing to take.
Sparen Deutsch, investieren nicht unbedingt, würde ich sagen.
Only 17.2% of the German population aged 14 and over was invested in the stock market in 2024, and only 19% said they were open to taking a higher investment risk in the future in order to make more of their money. Now, there is an aspect to life in Germany and life in the USA that I haven't mentioned yet that falls in line with the idea of risk aversion, and that is, in a way, just how much risk an American or German has in their day-to-day lives that they are willing to accept that could affect them financially. While I've lived in Germany, I've often heard Germans say something along the lines of, life in the US is probably good if you are rich, but if you're not, you'd be much better off in Germany. They say this because in Germany there is a significantly larger social safety net that helps mitigate risk on a daily basis. For example, healthcare. Here, if we suddenly have a horrible accident, come down with a horrible illness, or need specialized healthcare, it's covered. Again, as I mentioned before, we definitely pay higher taxes in Germany, and we additionally do pay monthly contributions for our public health insurance. However, in the US, over 100 million Americans have medical debt. In 2021, 6% of the US population owed over $1,000 in medical debt, and about 1% owed more than 10 grand. So in a way, Americans seem to be conditioned to accept a certain level of risk that Germans aren't. Now let's get to the fun stuff. Time for the existential crisis. How rich are you compared to the average German or average American? Or how bad off are you? Let's think positive. So this can get really complicated because it is going to depend on so many factors. Before we get to net worth, let's talk about income. On average, Americans do earn more than Germans. In the US, the average net income is around $51,000. For Germans, the average is around 32,000 euro net. But it's important to take into consideration that the cost of living is generally less in Germany. So wages do go farther here. Germans earn less partially because they work less hours a year on average, and Germans have much more vacation time, generally 20 to 30 days a year compared to 0 to 10 in the US. So an argument could be made that Americans earn more, but at what cost? But what about net worth? In Germany, the average net worth is 315,500 euro. Whereas in the US, the average net worth of Americans is $1.06 million. However, if you're German, you might be saying, hold up. I don't have 315,500 euros, and I don't know anybody who does. Just like Americans are saying, we're rich, we're rich. Wait, I'm pretty average and I have no idea where my millionaire status is. Well, average net worth may not be a good way of looking at it considering the extreme wealth inequality in both countries. And the top 10% in both countries own an extreme amount of the wealth in both countries, which can obviously distort the average net worth figures. The US has 902 billionaires, whereas Germany only has 171, so the median net worth is much better to look at, and for Germans it is 106,600 euro compared to Americans' median net worth of $192,700. So with those numbers in mind, how do you stack up? Again, this is the musings of a random immigrant wondering if the German government is going to think our financial situation is worthy of a German passport, or if they will find this risk-tolerant American as too much of a risk for the risk-adverse Germanic tendencies, not a let's all compare ourselves to each other type of video. So take this superficial look at the average American and average German with a grain of salt and for what it is. To see who made it this far into the video, the random question of the week is, what is the best Haribo candy? Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I will see you in my next video.
Hello. It's time for another video.
Bares für Rares. I mean, nur Bares für Rares. I mean, nur Bares ist... Crap, I mean, Bares... Nee, crap. I mean, Crap, I mean, nur Bares ist Wahres.